Let's start with the crisis rocking the All Progressive Congress. It took a twist yesterday with the Court of Appeal upholding the suspension of Oshiomole as the national chairman of the ruling party and Edo State Governor. Godswin Obaseki renouncing his membership of the party to stave off a leadership vacuum in the party. The party's National Working Committee convoked an emergency meeting to find a replacement for Oshiomole. And in line with Section 14, Section 2 of the APC Constitution, named the Deputy National Chairman and the former Oyo State Governor, Senator Abiola, as the interim National Chairman of the party. However, Ajimobi may not be able to discharge the functions of the party of the office for now, as he's said to be presently receiving treatment at an undisclosed hospital where he's on admission for an ailment suspected to be COVID-19. In its absence and in line with the APC Constitution, the party will have to mandate its national vice chairman, South Chief Hilary Eta, to act instead. It was also learned that the APC governors were planning to intervene to prevent the crisis from worsening. Earlier in the day, Governor Obaseki and his deputy, Philip Shoaibu, had both announced their resignation from the All Progressive Congress, APC, preparatory to what political watchers say is an inevitable defection to the People's Democratic Party. After making his resignation official, the governor had this to say.
You recall that my last statement, my last tweet, I said that I'll make a decision after my disqualification was announced by APC, that I will make a decision after I have consulted with the leadership and my supporters in Edo State, and also have informed the president. I'm just here today to inform you that I have now decided formally to resign my membership of the All Progressive Congress. Having done that, I will now announce in the next few days my specific line of action and what platform I will be contesting the gubernatorial elections on. I'm sure the whole country knows and is aware of what has gone on with me and the party chairman and the party leadership, which culminated in my disqualification as a gubernatorial aspirant.
I mean, coming back from that, when you see what's happening in the APC, a song pops in my head. If you like pop music, Dr. Abati, have you ever heard a song from Chris Brown called Juices?
Yeah.
Exactly
He's
what...
checking up his juices.
Is checking up his juices. Exactly what is happening between Oshiomole and Obaseki.
It's a mess. I think that we should actually remind our viewers and put some kind of context. Well, before I do that, if this Court of Appeal order had come in a few days earlier, Governor Obaseki might not actually have had to resign, but that's a separate issue. This has been ongoing. Mr. Oluwale Afolabi approached the court. He filed an application in the Federal High Court, Abuja, to say that Oshiomole should not be the national chairman because he's been suspended at state level in Edo State, and that was granted. Luckily for Oshiomole, at the time, a Federal High Court in Kano set that order aside. So it looked like the storm was over, but now, this has, reared its ugly head again, and this Court of Appeal has affirmed that decision of the Federal High Court in Abuja. However, you might recall in 2017, a similar situation happened with Muiz Banire, who was a national legal officer, for the APC, and his ward in Mushin, Lagos State, suspended him and said that means that he can no longer be legal advisor to the party. And the party rejected that completely, citing their constitution, Article 2 of which states that the APC constitution is supreme. Article 13 also states that in order to remove any national officer, it will take their own internal party structure. Court order cannot do it. You cannot achieve it by court order. It must be according to the procedure delineated in Article 21 of APC's constitution. So I'm sure this is what Oshiomole will argue when the case goes further.
So what changed in this regard?
I think the APC, its leaders, and also the gladiators, they've not learned lessons from history. And the clearest indicator in this regard is what happened with the People's Democratic Party in 2014 and in 2015, when the party simply imploded. And the party, of course, paid a very heavy price for that. And what we have seen is that when politicians fail to learn from history, when they are driven simply by their own ego, there will be consequences. And all the gladiators within the APC should just be ready for the consequences, not just in Edo State, but perhaps in 2023, if they do not quickly try to put their house in order. A National Working Committee meeting was held over this matter, and we're told that the party was divided, that in fact, there were persons who opposed Adams Oshiomole, there were persons who were neutral, and then there were persons who were pro-Oshiomole. But the reality, of course, is that with the Court of Appeal ruling yesterday, Comrade Adams Oshiomole has now been suspended effectively. Although I see that he's been making statements, he has to respect the order of the court. And again, the same Afolabi has now written a petition to say that when the Federal High Court in Abuja ruled on March 16, he directed that Victor Giadom, the Deputy National Secretary, should be the chairman of the party or the acting chairman of the party. So it's not impossible that Giadom's lawyer will go back to the court to try to push the matter. And again, Section 14(2) of the APC Constitution that is being referred to says that the person to act will be either the Deputy National Chairman, South or North. So I don't understand now that we're being told that Chief Hilary Ella, the Deputy National Chairman from the South-South, will be the person to act in the absence of Senator Ajimobi. So there are many issues that have been thrown up. And we could see the APC. We've not seen the end of the melodrama within the APC. Now, as for Governor Obaseki in Edo State, yes, he says he has resigned from the party, along with his deputy and others. But as at yesterday evening, he was still saying that he has not decided on any political party that he will choose. But definitely it's very clear that he's going to run on the platform of another political party. If it has to be the PDP, then he has very limited time within which to make up his mind. But every indication is that he may be joining the People's Democratic Party. And now, finally, what I found really instructive yesterday was that even in Oshiomole's constituency in Edo State, you may say maybe that was stage managed. There was widespread jubilation.
No, but they suspended him.
Yes, there was but you could say it was stage managed, whatever. But at least people were jubilating. Yeah. They said this impunity is too much.
It's too much and the likes. I mean, we'll see how this pans out. We'll go to a quick break, but I would like to know the president, what he makes of all of this. That's about all we can get on headline news now. We'll go to a brief break. When we return, we'll have the trio of Rotus, Odiri, Marka Wilson, and Aaron to give us updates on global African business report and COVID-19. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Our ever-reliable Rotus Odiri joins us now to give us Africa Business Update. Good morning, Rotus. Over to you.
Good morning. Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Tundun, and good morning, Rufai. Rufai, I liked your Chris Brown reference earlier. That was nice pop culture there.
Yeah, pop culture. Deuces, man.
Deuces. We're starting with trade. Amidst everything that's been going on with Akume Additional and the AFDB, we can celebrate another Nigerian here who has been reappointed for his position at the head of a multilateral agency. The African Export-Import Bank, at their 27th annual general meeting, have reappointed Dr. Benedict Orama for another 5-year term. And within his first 5 years, between 2015 and 2019, the African Export-Import Bank disbursed about $30 billion towards the financing and promoting of African trade. In fact, $15 billion of that went specifically towards promoting intra-African trade. And as part of his comments, this of course was a virtual meeting because of COVID-19, but he released a statement, that's Dr. Benedict Orama, and in his statement, a quote, he said, "We want an Africa where the foundations of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement are laid expeditiously so that 84,000 kilometers of borders that have divided us for ages can begin to come down." And if you look at what is supposed to necessitate the promotion of intra-African trade, it's infrastructure. Infrastructure is very, very necessary in order for us to get where we need to get to. I was talking to the CEO of Cowrie Asset Management, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, when the MBS released Q1 foreign trade numbers. We're in a trade deficit right now, but infrastructure is the key. There's some stats coming from the United Nations. Okay, well, there's his quotes there. We want an Africa where the foundations of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement are laid out expeditiously. That's his quote. But here are the numbers for the African trade picture from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Again, this is for 2017. So total trade, Africa to the rest of the world, valued at $760 billion between 2015 and 2017. For the Oceanic region, $481 billion. For Europe, $4.1 trillion. America, $5.1 trillion. Asia region, $6.8. Our share of exports from Africa to the rest, ROTW is rest of the world, 80 to 90% between 2000 and 2017, showing how export dependent Africa is. Now, intra-Africa exports were just 16% of total exports from Africa in 2017. For Europe, it was 68%, Asia 59.4%, America 55%, and the Oceanic region 7%. Now, if you take out total intra-African trade, average out exports and imports for 2015 to 2017, it only amounts to 2% for our region. For America, it's 47%, Asia 61%, Europe 67%, Oceania 7%. So there's a need here for this to be boosted. And in order to boost it, you have to spend more on infrastructure. The IMF recently, as a new report that came out for their sustainable development goals, said that Nigeria, from 2030, has to spend as much as 18% of GDP on infrastructure. And what does that look like? It's a huge number as far as what that 18% figure translates to. Here's what it translates to. Depending on what exchange rate you want to use, Nigeria's economy is estimated to be about 450 billion, anywhere from 440 to 470, but we can use 450. 18% of that is $81 billion. To put that into context, our revised 2020 budget that the Senate that was just revised comes out to 10.8 trillion naira. At a rate of 360 naira per dollar, that gives you roughly $30 billion. So as a percentage of GDP, our entire budget for the nation is just 7%. And it's not even fully funded. There's a deficit that needs to be plugged, that needs to be covered up with borrowing. So, with a 7%, budget to GDP, how do you get to 18% that is needed for just infrastructure? You either have to partner with the private sector, or you got to find a way. But that's part of the Sustainable Development Goals. That's where we have to get to. To power, there's been an announcement from the Minister of Power with regards to tariffs, Salem Maman. He announced that the tariff increases that were supposed to happen April 1st are actually going to now take place in July 1st. COVID-19 was a terrible, terrible disruptor for the power sector. Just 2 days ago, the Senate was, lambasting the government that 4 trillion naira has been injected into the power sector over the last 20 years. And 1.7 trillion over the last 5 years. What do we have to show for it? So we know that there are liquidity issues in the power sector. We know there's power issues with metering. They were supposed to increase those tariffs April 1st. We've now lost 3 months of that in the power sector. Think of how much more funds the discos would have been able to get over the last 3 months if those tariffs have been allowed to increase. But of course, the federal government was, was conversant of the fact that Nigerians are facing a very tough period with job layoffs and salary cuts, and increasing tariffs at this time probably wasn't the best idea. So they decided to suspend that. So as at July 1st is when those tariffs are actually going to take off. So we'll see how that works out.
Well, I don't know what the minister is basing that decision upon, because there is no guarantee that by July 1, we will have moved out of the pressures arising from COVID-19. And if the government is saying it will provide palliatives and try to ease the hardship that the people are facing, perhaps maybe July 1 may not be an appropriate date. And I hope that he has reached that decision by consulting with stakeholders within the industry. Of course, that the discos have always been complaining about the need for cost-reflective tariffs. Yes. Now, this may be in line with their expectation, but perhaps the timing needs to be looked at more carefully. And then, of course, there are other issues within the electricity sector. In terms of the value chain, in terms of metering, in terms of MITO, in terms of the regulatory framework. So it's not just about tariffs. It's not enough to talk about tariffs. We'll expect from the minister a more robust articulation of how, that value chain and the reform process itself can be strengthened. As for Professor Benedict Orama of the Afreximbank, well, congratulations to him. I think his re-election is an expression of confidence in his leadership and the efforts that he has made to reposition that strategic multilateral institution. Under his watch, he's been able to make the bank more profitable, and he has done a lot in terms of interventions in sealing intra-African trade deals, which is very important. And in the context of an expected continental free trade regime in Africa, you need very strong, experienced hands like his, to remain in charge of that body. He has a PhD in agricultural economics, 1991. He joined Afrexim in 1994, and perhaps that has helped because he grew through the system. He became, executive vice president in 2008.
Rotus,
and then
I don't believe you're done
position.
with your stories. You had one on IATA, didn't you?
Yes, very quickly. IATA, the International Air Transport Association, says that about $700 million has been lost. That's the Nigerian aviation industry, as well as a lot of jobs have been lost due to COVID-19. This came from Adefunke Adeyemi, who is the Africa Regional Director of IATA. So it shows you the amount of jobs that have been lost and the impact. And and there she is, yes, that's Adefunke Adeyemi. When you put in context what's been happening, the issue with Naira Marley, I did feel that the government was a little harsh on the executive, the company. In line, just again, I'm not justifying what they did, they broke the rules, but if you think about how the industry has suffered and what was decided as to, suspend them from flying for now, perhaps they could have been a little more lenient, and perhaps the full force of the law should have faced Naira Marley himself, because the sector really has faced a lot of challenges.
I agree with that. Yeah. I think this is obviously the worst day on record for the aviation industry. Internationally, IATA says they've lost $84 billion. Right. It's ridiculous.
I think we're going to go to a break real soon. But okay, no break. So. Okay, but what is most important here, Rotus, is, I don't understand how the aviation sector can open up in Nigeria again without a bailout. Right. All over the world, they are giving them bailouts. In Germany, there's a bailout. In France, there's a bailout. But Nigeria aviation system has suffered so much, right, and the government is not talking about how to bail them out.
But those are two countries, yes. Rufai. Even in the UK, there's no bailout.
The government is not talking about how to bail them out. But our system is peculiar here because the aviation sector is a big employer.
There's an ongoing conversation around that. The airline operators of Nigeria, they've approached government, and the Minister of Aviation says they're looking into it.
They're looking strongly into it, but they're resuming soon.
Right. Because we have to think about jobs. We have to think about the huge consequences of this kind of damage to the aviation industry.
Correct. That's very true. Very true. Very, very true. And I mean, America put together, America's bailout for the aviation industry was $29 billion. That's almost as much as our entire budget. So they need to speed up those talks and need to get that assistance to the aviation sector as soon as possible. It comes down to money. They need the support as quickly as possible.
They certainly do.
Well, thank you, Rotus.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Right now, moving on to a global business update. We've got Michael Wilson joining us from London. Michael, good morning.
Morning. A bit of a cautious start, really, as far as Asia's concerned. Beijing will close all its schools as a result of the jump in COVID-19 cases. It didn't really derail anything, but it certainly was something else to worry about. And also, Beijing has cancelled scores of domestic flights in and out as a result of this respike, as it were, in COVID-19 cases. So basically speaking, stock markets in Asia relatively cautious. And if you remember yesterday, the IMF warned the decline in the global economy in 2020 will be far worse than the 3% contraction that it actually talked about in April. So an additional warning there, plus political tensions, of course, between China and India, as well as between North and South Korea. So that's putting a bit of a pull. But there is some positive drug news. I'll come on to that in a second. Elsewhere, on both sides of the Atlantic, the pan-European, quite bullish actually, the pan-European stock 600 index, best day in a month. And that was driven by something we were talking about yesterday, this idea that President Trump could earmark $1 trillion for infrastructure spending. And this would be beefing up spending on railroad and 5G. And I was saying yesterday, it's very reminiscent of what happened in 1933 in the United States, after the Great Depression, when Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the president then, started what's called the New Deal. Now, that took 6 years, up until from 1933 to 1939. That was an enormous program and got a lot of Americans back to work. And clearly, the lockdown has had a terrible effect on the US economy. I continue to talk about the US economy because it is, as most people understand, the largest in the world. I mean, you can debate it, but it's a very, very important lever in what goes on. And the Fed and the US government have taken enormous amounts of measures to try to pour money into what's going on. You were talking about the efforts that Europeans, Air France and all of Lufthansa have achieved money from their governments. It's still a debate here, and it's still a debate with you about airlines, but they are clearly very important. A lot of politics in this, obviously, because President Trump is coming up for seeking re-election in November, and he wants to be seen in charge of the health crisis and also the economy. So he'll kind of do what, or say he will kind of do whatever it actually takes. And some people naturally saying that this announcement yesterday of the $1 trillion into the infrastructure was a very political move. I'm sure it was. However, Jay Powell, the Fed chief, said yesterday again that the corporate bond buying program could be tapered if things take off. But he was also pessimistic about it. He cautioned about the timing and the amount of the recovery happening in the United States. And that really is making people think once again. Now, here's the health thing. This is a drug, some positive news. This is one called dexamethasone. And it's a steroid which is used at the moment for helping reduce inflammation in arthritis. And then they found, and this is a trial headed up at Oxford University, that it helps reduce the fatality rate of COVID-19 patients. Now, again, this is just a test. I'm not a medical expert, but it's a positive move, and it's certainly been taken here as a positive move too. Let me talk briefly about the oil market. Now, the International Energy Authority now predicts the demand for oil will be 91.7 million barrels a day. That's a slight increase in what they were saying in May. They said 91.2. It's just a decimal point, but it's positive, isn't it? As economies start to reopen, then the demand for oil will continue. Their report comes out at 3:30 our time, your time, this afternoon, and there will also be a report on how the US is actually stockpiling oil. As far as the UK is concerned, what we're hoping is a trade deal between Australia and New Zealand, setting out their objectives here, could bring £1 billion into the country. And it's a top priority, that one, alongside, obviously, the United States and Europe. Inflation here fell to its lowest level since June 16. Those figures are just out. Have to say that, taking these kind of measurements, I think, is pretty tricky right now, given what's happening in the economy. And that's basically the global view.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
All right, thank you, sir.
Especially for the good news about, well, so far, tentatively, since it hasn't been peer-reviewed, dexamethasone is sounding really good for the severe cases. Obviously, it has no impact whatsoever on the milder cases, and it doesn't prevent it, which is what we're ultimately hoping will come in the form of a vaccine. But this is a really great boost for, COVID-19 hopes.
Okay.
Well, Michael, I don't know whether we still have a minute. I wanted you to comment on something else. The decision to merge the Department for International Development to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. It looks like an attempt by the United Kingdom to reduce its role in the world as a global power and as a source of support for many vulnerable countries and communities.
Yes, the problem with all these things is that nobody's actually sure at the end of the day where the money goes. This is the problem. And as nations start to turn inwards to their own voters, the voters are saying, is this money actually I mean, you raised it yourself, didn't you, on Thursday or Friday last week about money being given to Zimbabwe? And the question was then, and I think you raised it, didn't you? Now, but you have to be sure that the politicians are actually channeling it to the most needy. I think this is an ongoing discussion. The UK was apparently sending millions to India. India developing its own nuclear weapons. You know, you have to say, well, shouldn't India be looking after its poor rather than developing its nuclear weapons? And why are we sending money to a developing country like that? I mean, India will vie with Africa in the next century, being the biggest economy in the world. So, you know, you have to ask these questions. I think there's a lot of politicking. It's very, very difficult area. And I think that's, but what we do know, what I can remember over the weekend, our development secretary saying that we would not reduce overseas aid, if that helps you in the...
And yet, Boris Johnson's predecessors, 3 of them have come out against this decision with regards to DFID. Why do you think that is? That's Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and David Cameron.
Okay. I just wanted to...
Yeah, well, these are, I have to say, with those 3, these are ex-politicians. I mean, they are politicians at the moment. They have been leaders of the country, but basically they are not yesterday's men, but they can actually comment about what they like. They don't have to put these things into practice. It's very easy with 2020 hindsight to look at these kind of things, but to look at where the world's going, and again, you've raised it yourselves, do governments now wish to inject more capital into their economies? Yes, they do. I wouldn't take too much notice of what ex-politicians say. I try not to in any case.
All right, Michael, in less than 30 seconds, I want to talk about trade, Brexit trade, but I know we don't have the time. Is that dream of the UK of being a Singapore on Thames to attract other trade partners all around the world, is it still feasible?
Yeah, I think yes. All right. In 10 seconds, we are still an offshore island. We still will have access to the EU, which is one of the biggest trading partners to the rest of the world from the rest of the world. And I think we will be seen, provided that corporate government stays here well, and also we have a relatively low tax environment and we're allowed to escape the binds of the European Union, then I think it will be positive. We won't be a world power in the same way that the African continent will be, but we will certainly hold our own.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Michael. Aaron, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, Rufai. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Leila. Always a pleasure to see you today.
Leila?
I beg your pardon.
You see?
Maybe I'm just...
You see?
I do see.
You see?
I do see.
I said it. I have been vindicated.
I do see.
Voila. Tundun, take my proposal and leave him alone.
My serious apology for some missteps this morning.
You have been left, Aaron. It's too little, too late.
Too late to apologize.
I'll look for a way to make it up to you. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Aaron. Well, you gave Rufai an advantage this morning.
Don't worry,
But still go ahead with your poem for Tundun.
All right, I always have a way of bouncing back. I'll save it for tomorrow.
Straight to the update.
Okay, so let's start it off from how things are actually playing out. We've been speaking about Brazil and how things are really, really getting out of hand, and the major spike there right now. Of course, if you look at the number of cases in Brazil, close to 1 million, and the way they are actually going, there might be up to 1 million by tomorrow, because 920,834 as of 8 a.m. this morning, and over 45,000 deaths recorded, and 447,364 is the number of patients that have actually recovered from COVID-19. Now, looking at the deaths, the number of infections in the last 24 hours, monitoring the last 3 days, if you can actually move up with the slide, it will actually just show, you can actually see there on the, as of today, yesterday rather, we had 37,278 number of new cases, 1,338 deaths. On the 15th, we had 23,674 with 729 deaths. On the 14th, 17,086. And on the 13th, 20,898. According to the Washington Post, they are predicting that by the end of July, Brazil will surpass the US with the number of COVID-19 cases and the number of deaths recorded. And it's really, really scary, understanding that the president has still insisted and he's berated governors in Brazil for imposing lockdowns and trying to put about restrictions to limit the spread of COVID-19. As a matter of fact, he's threatening them that he's going to host a nationwide barbecue to celebrate life, literally, and say there is no COVID-19 there.
All right, Aaron, I just want to come in and comment about that. That's why we keep talking about leadership. A bad leader is a bad leader, no matter how you look at it. President Jair Bolsonaro has shown, let me call him for what he is, Captain Jair Bolsonaro of the Brazilian Armed Forces, that is now president, has shown what a terrible leader can be. He sacked most health ministers. The mayor of Manaus had come out to challenge him. He's shut them down. The cases are increasing. Brazilians are suffering. Most of the COVID cases are spreading in the favelas. That's the ghettos in Brazil. And they are spreading like wildfire. In fact, if I'm to give President Jair Bolsonaro, Captain Jair Bolsonaro, a twin, the twin will be John Pombe Magufuli in Tanzania.
Speaking about Magufuli and what is going on, remember he celebrated the fact that Tanzania was coronavirus and COVID-19 free. As a matter of fact, the Prime Minister yesterday said that 29 new cases and 5 deaths were recorded in Tanzania as of yesterday afternoon. We're not a preview to the evening's figures as of now, but we'll find out about that later on. Of course, you know, sometime in April they suspended counting in terms of numbers. But as of yesterday, the Prime Minister, not the President, has actually spoken and cautioned Tanzanians to be very careful and probably heed to the guidelines and ensure they are safe, because COVID-19 is still very rife in Tanzania.
But he's doing elections in October. He suspended the parliament already.
I have no... it's really baffling what's really going on.
Well, on Bolsonaro, I think Rufai is absolutely correct. Leadership is the issue, because even as at yesterday, when Brazil recorded such high numbers of deaths, the head of the office of the chief of staff to the president, some guy called Braga Nato, was bragging that everything was under control. And with over 45,000 deaths, clearly nothing is under control in Brazil. And the president himself was still encouraging shops to reopen. Compare him to Jacinta Ardern. Yesterday, you told us about 2 cases in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Now, what Jacinta Ardern has now done is to call out the military to man all the borders, because she says, that those 2 cases alone showed that, there was a slip somewhere, and that the military, will seem to have the rigor, the discipline, the confidence to be able to help protect New Zealand against the coronavirus. So 2 patterns of leadership, but we can't overstate the importance of leadership.
And with Jair Bolsonaro, remember the whole world was outraged at how he was actively encouraging the destruction of the rainforest in Brazil for economic purposes. He seems to just place everything, sacrifice everything at the altar of capitalism, money. And who knew that worse was still to come? He's actually now sacrificing the lives of his own people. It's really quite shocking. And it just goes to show elections matter. We must never forget that. The character of the person you put in office literally does have life and death implications.
Certainly. Yeah, before we go, as it stands right now, the race to get a vaccine, we've been talking about the inexpensive steroid, talking about dexamethasone, but the race to actually get a vaccine is actually heating up, and the UK is showing major promising signs that very, very soon, of course, they've actually announced a partnership with the health pharmaceutical giant, talking about AstraZeneca, that very soon, because they are right now in the 3rd phase of testing of the vaccine, that they will be releasing hopefully before the end of the year, and they are very positive with, after going to the 1st and 2nd, and after 3rd phase, they can begin to actually push out some of these things that may be very, very soon. We might have a vaccine that will be tested in the UK. As of Sanofi in France, who are also championing the vaccine, it's actually looking positive on their own side, but controversy is actually brewing that Sanofi is based in France, but they are saying that the first batch of vaccines that will be produced will be sent to the US. So it's a little bit up and down in terms of the race to get a vaccine, but hopefully before the end of the year, either of these 2 conglomerates or these 2 mega companies in health will be able to produce a vaccine.
But speaking about that, Aaron, it's really about trade. President Trump didn't give a couple of companies monies to produce vaccines, billions. And in fact, apart from giving them money, he did pledge in advance that if you produce this vaccine, we'll take it up from you. So it's about trade here. let's not forget, I think it was the former Prime Minister of France, Patrick Clemenceau, that said in a war situation, petrol is more important than blood. And it has to be said. So it's about trade.
Could there also be the politics of the pandemic involved? And competition, among nations. But the WHO says that, the discovery of the dexamethasone is great news, is a major breakthrough. And we hope that in the days to come, WHO officials will collaborate with the AstraZeneca and also with the researchers at the University of Oxford. And we'll be able to have, concrete information about this particular wonder drug.
All right, Doctor, before we go, sorry to interject, for the brevity of time, today, later tonight, Aston Villa will be playing Sheffield United. Manchester City will be playing Arsenal as the Premier League will be returning. And it gladdens my heart that this we've waited for so long is finally coming to fruition.
And Liverpool may not win the league.
Anyway, thank you very much, Aaron.